Stop scrolling for just a moment, because what I'm about to tell you is exploding across social media and news feeds right now. Reports and insider discussions are circulating that former President Donald Trump is supporting a new round of $2,000 stimulus checks, also being called tariff rebate checks. Whether you believe it or not, this conversation is gaining massive traction, and millions of Americans are asking the same urgent question. Is real money finally coming to the people again? Before you assume anything, listen closely. These rebate-style payments are being talked about as part of a broader economic strategy tied to tariff revenues, something that could potentially put direct cash back into the hands of American households. And if this actually moves forward, it could reshape how relief payments are funded, who qualifies, and how quickly they could roll out. In this video, I'm breaking down exactly why this topic suddenly blew up, what Trump has signaled in recent statements, what insiders are saying behind the scenes, and what this could mean for you, your family, and your bank account. Because if there's even a chance that $2,000 checks could return in a new form, you need to understand how this works and whether you might qualify. So before we dive into every detail, do me one quick favor. Tap that like button right now so more Americans can stay informed about these fast-moving updates. Alright, now let's get into the full breakdown, because there is a lot happening behind the scenes and most people online are only seeing tiny pieces of the story. If you're just joining or you somehow skipped the beginning, we're talking about the sudden surge of attention surrounding the idea of new $2,000 stimulus-style payments, sometimes called tariff rebate checks, and the role Donald Trump's recent comments may be playing in reigniting that entire national conversation. And trust me, this isn't just some random rumor that popped up out of nowhere. There's actual political strategy, economic debate, and public demand driving this momentum. So let's start with the heart of the issue. Why are people suddenly talking about $2,000 payments again? You would think stimulus checks ended years ago and the topic was dead, but every time the economy shakes, every time inflation spikes, every time the cost of living reaches a new high, Americans bring this topic right back to the front. And in the past few weeks, discussions surrounding tariffs, and specifically how tariff revenue could be redistributed, have put this idea right back into the spotlight. Combine that with Trump hinting at ways to redirect tariff funds toward American households, and suddenly the idea of a tariff-funded check doesn't seem as far-fetched as some people think. Now, before we go deeper, I want to be absolutely clear. This is not yet an official government program. There is no active law guaranteeing that checks will go out. What we do have are statements, proposals, interviews, and political messaging that strongly suggest the idea is being explored, promoted, and tested to see how the public reacts. And based on the response so far, people are reacting very loudly. Let's talk about why tariff-based checks even make sense in the first place. Traditionally, tariffs are taxes collected on imported goods, meaning the government earns revenue when certain products come into the country. Now, the argument some politicians and economists are making is this. Instead of letting all that tariff money sit in government accounts or be used for general spending, why not take a portion of it and redirect it back to everyday Americans who are dealing with higher prices across the board? With inflation hitting grocery aisles, rent, gas, utilities, everything, many families feel like they're working harder and still falling behind. So the idea of turning tariff revenue into rebate checks has become a very attractive talking point. And this is where Trump's role becomes important. Recently, in several interviews and public appearances, he's talked about using tariff strategies more aggressively, and whenever he says anything that includes putting money back in the hands of Americans, the public immediately connects the dots. People start asking, wait, does that mean money could come directly to us? Are checks coming back? Could this be like Stimulus 2.0? That's exactly why this topic exploded online. People are looking for clarity, and so far, very few sources have explained it in a clear, understandable way. So let's break it down in the simplest way possible. Trump's comments don't equal a guarantee of $2,000 checks, but they do signal openness to a rebate-style system where tariff revenue could be redistributed. And historically, whenever a president or major political figure supports direct payments, that idea often gains momentum across both parties, even if they disagree on the details. But let's step back for a moment and talk about what Americans are feeling right now, because this context matters. You can't understand why these $2,000 tariff rebate checks are trending unless you understand the pressure people are under. Prices have gone up faster in the last few years than many expected. Wages didn't keep up. Groceries that used to cost $50 now cost $75 or even $90. Rent has skyrocketed. Healthcare isn't getting cheaper. Utilities are unpredictable. And interest rates. They've made borrowing money feel impossible. So when people see headlines, whether true, exaggerated, or speculative, about the possibility of $2,000 checks returning, of course they're going to pay attention. People need relief. They need breathing room. They need a sign that leaders are actually acknowledging the everyday struggle of regular households. And that's exactly why this story blew up so fast. Now let's dive deeper into what a tariff rebate check system could look like if it were to move forward. Again, this is all based on discussions, economic proposals, and political messaging, not a finalized government plan. But understanding the logic behind it helps make sense of why people take it seriously. The idea is that instead of the government sending out checks funded through borrowing or printing money, the checks would come from tariffs collected on imported goods. That means the government would essentially be handing back money it already collected. This gives it a unique political advantage. Politicians can argue it doesn't increase national debt, doesn't require tax hikes, and doesn't need the Federal Reserve to step in. It's a "you paid into the system, now here's your share back" type of argument. But here's where things get complicated. Tariffs often raise the prices of imported goods, which can affect consumers. So while the government earns more revenue, people may pay slightly more at stores. Supporters argue that the rebate checks would offset that burden. Critics argue the math doesn't always add up. This is why economists are split on whether tariff-funded checks would help or harm the economy long term. Now let's talk about something everyone wants to know. Who would qualify for these potential payments? Since nothing is official yet, there are no fixed eligibility rules, but analysts speculate based on past stimulus programs. If $2,000 rebate checks were ever to be implemented, it's likely they would target low- and middle-income Americans first. That's because these groups are the most affected by inflation and would benefit most from direct financial relief. However, some political strategists are suggesting a universal rebate system, meaning everyone gets something, with the idea that broader support equals stronger political momentum. On the other hand, budget-conscious lawmakers may argue for stricter limits to keep overall spending smaller. Again, nothing is official, but these are the discussions happening among analysts and politicians behind the scenes. Another huge question people are asking is, how fast could these checks realistically arrive if the proposal became real? Based on past experience with stimulus programs, the government can distribute checks fairly quickly once legislation is approved. During previous stimuli, some payments arrived within 2 to 3 weeks for direct deposit recipients. Mailed checks and debit cards took longer, but the system worked relatively fast. However, and this is crucial, all of that depends on actually passing a bill. Congress would need to approve any new check program, no matter who proposes it. Even if Trump strongly supports the idea, it still needs congressional backing. That's where things can get unpredictable. Some lawmakers might love the idea because it boosts public support. Others may resist because of cost concerns or political differences. That's exactly why it's important to stay updated as these discussions evolve. Now, here's something not enough people talk about: the political strategy behind proposing $2,000 checks. Direct payments are one of the most powerful political tools in America. Nothing gets voters' attention faster than money showing up in their bank accounts. But it's also risky, because if people feel promised money that never arrives, the backlash can be severe. That's why politicians often test ideas like this publicly to gauge public reaction. And based on how viral this topic has gone online, the reaction is very loud, very emotional, and very real. Let's talk about what everyday Americans are saying. Scroll through any comment section or forum discussing this, and you'll see people saying things like, "I'm barely getting by," "Something needs to happen," "We need help," "I don't care about politics, I just want relief." Everything costs more. A check would make a real difference. You can feel the pressure, the urgency, the exhaustion in their words. And that's why this story matters. Because it's not just about politics. It's about real people who are struggling and hoping for something that makes life easier, even just a little. Now let's shift to the economic side again. If tariff-funded checks were implemented, how would that impact inflation? Economists disagree on this too. Some argue that because the money comes from tariffs, existing revenue rather than newly created money, it may not generate the same inflationary pressure that stimulus checks created in the past. Others argue that any injection of cash into the economy can increase demand, potentially lifting prices. So what does that mean for you? It means any potential program would need to be carefully structured to avoid adding pressure to the inflation problem. That could mean limiting the size of payments, targeting specific groups, or distributing funds in phases. But again, until an official plan is drafted, all of this remains speculative analysis. Let's talk about timing, because this is a question everyone has. When could something like this realistically happen? If momentum continues to build and politicians continue discussing it, we could see formal proposals surface in the coming months. But legislative approval isn't quick unless both major parties support it, which is uncertain. That's why it's important not to assume checks are guaranteed. Right now, we're in the stage where ideas are being floated, reactions measured, and strategies shaped. Now, despite all the uncertainty, one thing is absolutely clear. The public is hungry for relief. The demand for financial support has not gone away. People want leaders who acknowledge that reality, and this conversation about $2,000 tariff rebate checks is tapping directly into that desire. Before we wrap, let's address one more thing: the power of staying informed. In today's world, misinformation spreads fast. Rumors get mixed with facts. Headlines exaggerate, and people end up confused, frustrated, and unsure what to believe. That's why channels like this one matter. Not to hype things up, but to break down what's real, what's developing, and what could actually happen next. I'll continue tracking every update, every official statement, every policy shift, and every major development so you stay informed without getting lost in the noise. So if you found this helpful, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update. This story is evolving fast, and you do not want to be the last person to know if something big actually moves forward. And before you go, please take 1 second to hit that like button. It helps more Americans stay informed, stay prepared, and stay empowered, no matter what happens next.